Hello. So in this tutorial, we are going to explore a little bit of Django REST framework ViewSets. So we are going to keep developing this piggy bank project that we started on the previous video. And the idea is to create the ViewSets for the transaction model. So far, we have a simple list view for the currency. So we can list all the available currencies that we have. So let's just run the project here. And so this endpoint that we get all the currencies that we have on the application. And then we have the category ViewSet. But then the category is just a very simple model with just the name. So the idea now is to create a ViewSet with listing and abilities to create and update, and also a search for a certain transaction, also implement some filters and ordering, all those capabilities that Django REST framework has. So the first thing that we want to do is to create a serializer for the transaction model. So let's get started. So here on the core app, inside serializers, we're going to create a transaction serializer. Now we specify the model, and now we have to import this model from the core.models, and then on the fields, let's so far just list all the field names that we have. Okay. And then we also want to show the ID of the transaction. And so far this should be good enough. And similar to the category ViewSet, we are going to create transaction ModelViewSet. And then for our QuerySet, we want to just list all the transactions, and the serializer class, we just import this serializer. So far everything is pretty much the same as the category model. So let's add this ViewSet to the URLs conf. So we are going to use the router, and then here just name as transaction. Okay, so by now we should already have all the same operations that we implemented for the category, but then let's create a new folder here. Actually, we can duplicate this one here, and then we rename transactions. Okay. And now instead of list categories, this one is going to be list transactions. And then the endpoint here is this URL here that we have. So transactions. Okay, so we have here an empty list as expected. Now we can get started here by creating our first transaction. Just gonna rename this one here. Then transactions. So here Let's check the field names again. So we should pass an amount. So amount, let's say 100. And then the currency, because the currency is a foreign key, by default, we should make a reference to this field using the ID of the model. So let's check here. For example, if I want to say that this transaction was in dollar, so I should inform here 1. So currency is 1. And date, should pass the date in a string format, like 2021 6, and then a space, and we put the hours. And a description, just gonna leave this empty, or and now the category is pretty much the same thing as the currency. So let's see here, categories, we can list one. So we have just 2 categories here. So number ID 2 is home. And this should be enough. Okay, so we just created our first transaction. And then if we list the data, so we have here all the information. But so far, this is not very friendly because we just have the ID of the currency here. We don't really know which currency this is. So, and it really depends on how you are developing your API, because sometimes you want to like make a query here to the currencies and store this in a list of values, and then you can retrieve this information there, and then you know which currency you're using. But then sometimes you just want to return the payload here embedded. So you want to have the description and the code. So we are going to show you how to do that. But for now, let's just keep this that way. Okay. Can close this, and then retrieve. The same thing as the category, so it's going to be retrieve transaction, and then here we pass the ID. Okay, now for the update, actually then let's just copy the payload. Update transaction, transactions, and then maybe we just want to change here the amount to 200. Okay, so if we list here the data, so now it's just 200. And for the delete, we can remove delete transaction. Okay, so 204 just deleted our only transaction here, so no data. So let's just put back. Okay, so this is the starting point, and something that I want to show you now is how we improve the way that, for example, we set the currency, because maybe we have some data that's more meaningful and it's easier to use. For example, the code. Maybe instead of using the ID, I can just use the code because it's unique, and I can and it's a mandatory field, so I can use this to identify the currency. And so here is how you do it. So we are going to change here on the serializer. Just get some space here. Currency. And then we are going to use SlugRelatedField. And then we are going to tell that the slug field is the code, and the query set is actually the currency.objects.all. Okay. And now just save and refresh. Instead, to create a new transaction, instead of using the ID of the currency, now I can use just the code. So let's put a transaction of 50. And now you can see the way that we are returning the data as well. So we are not showing the ID anymore. We are just showing the slug, the code in that sense. So that's a way that we can use to update the data. Thing, which is maybe for writing the data, we want to use the code, but when reading the data, I want to see the object as currency. I want to see the code and the name. So because on the ViewSet, Django REST framework is actually adding all the views. So you have here the create, retrieve, update, delete, and list. So, and we are using a single serializer. And a way to change that is instead using this hook, which is the get serializer class. And then we can add some code here to decide which serializer we are going to use. For example, we can change this serializer here to be like our write serializer. So that means we are using this to write the information, and here I don't need the ID anymore because we are not writing the ID. And then I can use another serializer here just to read the data. So I can call it like read serializer. And I want to see the ID of the transaction here. And then instead of using the SlugRelatedField, I can use the currency serializer. Okay. And I can also mark all the fields as read only. So this is going to speed the data serialization, because then Django REST framework doesn't need to care about processing the data in any way. It's just retrieving and serializing and returning to the client. So now we have the write serializer and read serializer, and here we can use, for example, a logic like that. So if the action is list or retrieve, we are going to use the read transaction serializer. And if it's not list or retrieve, we are going to fall back to the write serializer. Okay, so let's test it and see if it works. Just gonna close this. For example, here listing the data. So here we have the nested object here. And then when we need to update some data, for example, I want to update the second transaction and I want to use euro. Okay, then we have it here. And so that's a very simple way of doing that, and later on I'm going to show you how to improve this strategy, because as you can see, if we just add here a new transaction, the return payload here is actually using the same serializer that we use it to write the data. We're using it to return the data, even though this was like a post request and we're creating and returning the response. But then there are some things that we need to change on the code, but just to not make it like overcomplicated, let's just live with that for the time being. And we can do the same thing for the category. So here we can change the read serializer and use category as category serializer. Okay. So here you have the nested object, and then you can create like nested object inside nested object. So, and the only thing that you need to pay attention is that now Django, the REST framework, is going to need the entire object to return this information. So we need to pay attention to not make too many queries on the database. But then I'm going to show you how to like look for and fix this kind of things. But for now, just so we can test the ordering and filter and search, let's create a few test data here on the database. So I'm just going to open here the Python console from core.models transaction, import random, and so now we are actually going to need the currency and the category. And okay, so we are going to import a decimal to add the amount. So let's create like, let's create like 1,000 transactions. So transaction, and then we are going to set like a random amount being dot random range, like from 1 to 1,000. Oops, actually I forgot the time zone here to create a date. Just a sec. Okay. So we have here a random amount, currency. I'm going to, yeah, let's create a list of like currencies being objects and categories. So we have here our currencies and categories. Okay, now finally and now for the currency I'm just going to pick a random category, and then description, I'm just going to leave this empty. date. I'm going to pick like a random date using time zone of now. And just decreasing a random integer between 1 and 365. And now a random choice, oops, you can see the random category. And here let's see, categories. Choice. Okay. And then now transaction.objects.book create. Okay, so now we should have about 1000 transactions on the database, and we can see the effects of what we have been doing so far. So let's see. Okay, the first thing that we can see is like this endpoint is returning the whole database here. And maybe it's not a good idea because we have 1000 transactions now, but we can have like 10,000, 100,000, 1 million. So the first thing we want to do is to paginate this result. And also we can improve the performance of the query because this is taking quite a while to return. So you can see like just over 2 seconds, and maybe it shouldn't take that long. And the first thing that I like to do is check the data that the serializer is using. So here you can see that we are using a foreign key, and whenever you're using a foreign key, you should add here the select related. So you can tell Django to prefetch this information from the database. So we want to have like currency and the category in hand. So let's see if we can see some improvements. Yeah. Much better now. So actually now Django is resolving this query with just a single database query, and instead it was probably doing like over 1000, 2000 queries because it was trying to retrieve the currency and category by each request. But even though this is like a very fast query, it's not a good idea to return that much data. So maybe we should look at the pagination. So checking here on the Django REST framework to the documentation, and we can see here pagination, and we can set already like default pagination, so we can add this here to the settings. I'll just drop this at the bottom. Okay, so now much better. So we improved it even further, and now each result is each time that we make a query to this endpoint here, transactions, we have 100 results. And now we are using here this strategy to use limit and offset. So for example, the next page, we can simulate it here like limit 100 and offset like 100. So you can see here when I type the parameters here, it's just already appending to the URL. And yeah, so you can see we are on the next page now, and we just can keep increasing the offset here to navigate to the other page. So this is a style of pagination, but you can use like page based. So I want the first page, second page, third page. So let's see here. Yeah, page number pagination. And this here, actually this is like the global configuration. So if you add this here, this is going to impact all your endpoints. So for example, let's just remove this here. So now instead of this limit and offset, we have page based. So let's say page 2, right? Page 3. But then when we added this pagination, so actually it's paginating all my list endpoints. So you can see here now that the currency, even though I just have 3 currencies, and maybe it doesn't make sense on your application, so you can remove that on the views. For example, here currency, like pagination class, and set to none. So you are telling REST framework to not paginate these endpoints. And then you gotta pick what's going to be more usual, like to have the pagination there or not. And then if you just want to paginate 1 or 2 like endpoints and the rest should return all the data, maybe you shouldn't add here to the global configuration and just, for example, set it here. So you can import. So from REST framework.pagination. So just import it here. So you can set this manually as well. Okay. But for this endpoint here, just let's keep this as none. And yeah, the next thing that I want to show you is on the list here is the search capabilities. So let's say we want to search by a certain description. So usually it's free text. Let's just get some transaction here and description. Just put my name here and let's get one more. Oops. Yep. Okay. So checking here on the documentation, maybe on filtering. Yeah. So we have here the search filter. So this is telling us we should import from filter, search filter. Okay. So we are going to add the filter backend, and then we can set which fields we want to perform search. So let's put it here, filter backends, and then import here on the top of our file. Just remove this, not using. REST framework.filter, search filter. And now we can specify like the search fields. Put just the description. And let's remove here the page and let's search for my name. So here we can find the 2 transactions that had my name on it, and I think I had another one that I added some text or things like that. Yeah. So here, or if I try to search something that doesn't exist, no results. Okay, so pretty straightforward, no big deal. But then this is just a basic search, so you could, for example, implement on top of that like a full text search, or perhaps there is already some library that works good with Postgres, for example, or if you have any other database, you probably can find or either modify this one or install some existing app. Pretty sure there is plenty out there. And the way that the filter backends work on the Django REST framework is very standard. So you're going to see that the ordering goes through the same structure here. So we are keep adding filter capabilities here. Some to filter for a certain field name, others for search, ordering, this kind of thing. So now, let's say I'm just browsing here the data, and I want to order by the highest values first. So I want to pass like amount and get the highest transaction on the top. And for that, we can use the ordering filter. So this should be the name here. Let's see. Yeah, going to be from the same place. So we add here ordering filter, importing from REST framework filter. So here it's on top of my file if I import this manually. And then on a very similar way, let's just, yeah, it's going to be ordering fields. And I want to order by amount and perhaps date. So the keyword here is ordering. And if I want to get the highest amounts first, I have to put a minus in front of it. So we have here 995. So as you can see, and if I want to like the smallest amounts first, and just remove, yeah. So we have those coming first. And the same thing with the date. Just change here. So 18, 19. And what I usually do is I put here the, just for the documentation of the API. So I just put here the fields that can be used as an ordering parameter. And okay, so the next thing here that you can do with the ViewSet is using the filters, the Django filter backend. But then for this one we have to install Django filter. So let's just run the pip install here. And then this is a very powerful library because you can code all sort of complex filters, and or use just the REST framework interface. So you can create like very simple filters here, but then if you need some complex query or things like that, they support that as well. So on the settings, we are going to add here on the installed apps, Django filters. Let's see what else. So yeah, for this case here, I usually don't use the default configuration. but usually I like to put this like view by view. So here, and then we import from Django filter. So just pay attention on this one. So you're not actually importing from the REST framework itself, you're importing from the Django filters that we just installed here. And now you have two options. Either you set the fields that you want to create a filter, or you define a filter set class. And then you, instead of passing here filter set fields, you're going to pass like filter set class. But then let's create an example here using the filter set fields. So let's say I want to filter by the currency code. Can't remember if I can do it like that, but let's try. If not, we go for the filter set implementation. BRL. Yeah. So as you can see here, I can combine, for example, the most expensive transactions in Brazilian reais, right? And if I change here to euro, I have here all my data in euros, okay? And then here is just a matter of listing the field names here that you want to use as a filter. And you can do much more with that, but maybe on a next video I can explain a little bit more. This one is already getting a little bit bigger than I anticipated. But anyway, I think these should cover like the basic operations for listing and things that you might want to do, showing the data and ordering, filtering, searching, and improving the queries. And yeah, that's all for now. See you on the next video. Bye bye.